Hey, how's it going, guys? Daniel here, aka HashLips, and first and foremost, thank you so much for the 1,000 subscribers that we have hit. It's not possible without you guys, and I just want to personally thank each and every one of you watching this video for subscribing, for commenting, and for giving great feedback. In this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to add different rarities to the code that we've been writing in the generative art program. You'll notice that I've been making these updates. There's one and there's an update 2, and today I'll be making update 3. We'll be carrying on with these updates, making the code better and better as we go along. I want you guys to follow along these videos and improve your code by yourself, and you can also pull the repos down from our GitHub page over here. You can go to github.com/hashlips and find all the repos over here. The one that we are working with in specific is the open source one, so generative art open source. You can go and pull it down. We're going to do that just in a second. But for today's video, I've got something exciting to tell you guys. I recently have been contacted by a very cool coin on the Binance Smart Chain that came out. These people are called Lunoland, and if you go to lunoland.io, you can read up more about this project. It's an amazing project. I'm not going to say too much on it. You will see more of Lunoland in these videos as I make them. And just a side note, we will be doing NFTs, so it's going to be very cool. Go and check them out and get your curiosity brewing, I would say. Very cool project, and I can't wait to elaborate more in future videos. But let's get back to our videos, and let's start by creating the code. Cool, so what you want to do is you want to go to github.com/hashlips, click on this repo over here, wait for it to load, then go and copy the link over there. Next, like I always say, go to your favorite IDE and just type in git clone and paste in that link. This will clone this repository onto your machine. Now, this is the repository that updates have been made to. And you will notice from here on outwards, and this is very important, I'm working in different branches. This main branch I will always try and keep the main branch updated with the best code. But if you want to follow along truly, just make sure that you have the most up-to-date code in the branches. And when I say that, here on Visual Studio Code, you can click on this main button, and you can see that there's various branches created. Currently, there's a V1 branch that's there, but what we'll be doing is we'll be creating a V2 branch. So this is the branch that this code will exist in, and you can go and grab it from github.com. Make sure you are in this branch, otherwise you won't see the code at all. Next, what you want to do is we want to go into this repository. So you can actually open it on Visual Studio Code again, or in the terminal, you can say cd, and then you can type out the generative code part, like so. We can say ls on Mac, and you can see what's in this folder. It's basically everything in here. This looks very familiar to the guys who followed me along this journey. If you haven't followed me on these videos, go and check the very first videos in this playlist so that you can get a grasp of what we are doing. But let's get started adding the rarities. In order to run this code, in the terminal, you can start off by running yarn add all, or if you're using Node, you can run npm install. This will install all the dependencies in the package.json file over here, canvas, the thing that we need. Once that is installed, we can actually run the project and we can start generating NFTs based on the input fields and the layers that's in the input folder. So in the terminal, you can run node index.js, and then I think you can still specify a value. We are going to take that value out in this series, but I'll show you when we get there. Just wait for it to load. The first time you run it, it does take a little bit longer, and that's just because it's processing and loading up all the content. And there we go. In our output file, we can see the different NFTs which has been created, as well as metadata. So if we just hit Control Save, if you have Prettifier or Prettier installed on VS Code, it will arrange the metadata nicely. But you can see here is the metadata of each object that has been created. Now, everything so far of this program, from the uniqueness of the DNA and the things that it spits out, are quite cool. We even have a few extra features in here where the backgrounds are colors that's generated. It doesn't come from an image, and it's pretty cool as is. But a lot of you have queried about the rarities. And I haven't gotten to the rarity part up until now, and that's because it's quite a difficult process to think about. As they say, there's many ways of skinning this cat, but we're going to do this a certain way without hurting animals, of course. But you get what I'm saying. We have to choose a way to go with, and the way we're going to go with today is by implementing a rarity factor, which entails you to set up different weights of what rarity you would like in your edition. So the first thing that we need to change is, let's close all these files. And the first thing that we actually need to start changing is our folder structure. Now, up until now, we have a background folder, and inside we had a black PNG, which was representing our background. And these folders can contain numerous images. Then we had a ball. This was the eyeballs, right? And the lids and so on. But what we need to do now is we need to, inside one of these folders, create another folder, and we need to call it original. And then we need another folder and call it rare, and another one and call it super rare. Now, if you're using these folder names, I would recommend putting a dash or underscore or something with the name, and not leave it just empty spaces. I realize that that doesn't really look good, but just a side note. Once you have these, we'll need to move our images. For instance, this black PNG is going to sit in the originals folder now underneath background. So this is the concept. This is the main thing that we're going to be doing to each of these layers. And I'm going to quickly do this so you don't see me do this for each one. And then I'm going to explain what images we've added. I am back and I've updated the input folder. So now if we open this input folder, we can see that we have something looking very similar to what we had, but you'll notice when we open each folder, it has 3 folders inside it: an original, rare, and super rare. Same with bottom lid, and same with eye color, iris, shine, as well as top lid. And this is going to be your folder structure. Now, obviously, if you have more rarities or less, you will update the folders to your own needs. I'm just going to take the scenario where we have an original, a rare, and a super rare kind. So I'm just going to close the rest of these folders, just so we have a bit more space, and look at what's happening inside this ball folder. In the original folder structure, we have a gray eyeball this time, a red eyeball, and a white eyeball. Then in the rare, we've got an eyeball called eyeball rare. You can name them rares if you want to or not. Then I've got a green eyeball, and in the super rare folder, I've got this red eyeball. Okay, remember this one because we are going to create a super rare and you'll see this come up. Now, ideally for the project, you would like to at least have 5 images in each of these folders. The reason for that is when your program selects a folder, it needs to have at least enough to create sufficient DNA. Otherwise, it's going to run into a loop that you can't exit out of. You can exit out of, but it won't complete your program because it can't find enough DNA to create. We'll have a look at that once we get to creating the NFTs. Up until now, we haven't really changed a lot in the config.js file inside the input folder. But this time we are going to touch on it, and we are going to change a lot in here. So pay attention, because the variables that we're going to be adding here is going to be consumed in our index.js, and we're going to make a much better use a use case for rarities and how we mint the NFTs and how big the editions are. So this is what I want to focus on first. So let's go and lay the ground rules kind of for our NFTs or our artworks that we are going to create regarding their rarities. Previously, you noticed that we've added a rarity way of adding each image or giving each image a rarity based on its file name. We're going to discard this method because it's really not working very well in the first place. And secondly, we have no way of controlling how rare an image should be. So go ahead and remove this function altogether. You can also remove this rarity object over there, as well as down here in this function, you can remove the rarity line in this object as well as the ID. We're not going to need that, but we will come back to this function in just a second to improve on it. Perfect. Next, what you want to do is go all the way to the top and add these variables. I've pasted them in here, but I'm going to describe to you each one. Obviously, a description is going to be our description of our project, of our NFTs. This description is going to be the description that you see in the metadata of an NFT. So it's very important that you kind of write something there about your project and keep it interesting. Next, we have a base image URI, which has to do with metadata as well, specifically the image part of the metadata. Next, we have start edition from and end edition at. Sorry, this pop-up. There we have start edition from and end edition at, and then we also have an edition size. These variables we usually got from the terminal when we entered a number, but this time I want you to start specifying the values in the config file and then running the program. This is much more, how can I say, rock solid in a way, and you can keep track of how many NFTs you've minted and so on. But anyway, these are the variables that we are going to be needing. So let's go ahead and also export them all. So we're going to start off here at the bottom by exporting description and then the base image URI, also the edition size, and we also need these two, start and end. So let's go and export start and end edition at. Once you've exported them, we're going to need them in our index.js. So at this point, you might as well go to the index.js file and go and import them here where we've previously imported layers, width, and height. This time, you can go and replace all of this with our new imports, and you can see that the IDE has highlighted the ones that we're not using. Now we can go back to the config.js and finish what we have started regarding the rarities. Now, this is very exciting for me. I've tested it out today. It works beautifully. So we can immediately get started. And the first thing that we need to do is actually specify an object that's going to determine the weights of our rarities. So this object you can call rarity weight and or rarity weight. And we're going to make it an array actually of objects. How are the objects going to look like? So basically the objects, they have to kind of form a descriptive information about how rare a certain amount of NFTs should be or images should be. Secondly, it needs to tell you which value it has and which folder it's sitting basically. So I'm going to explain that in a second, but let's type out these values and I'll show you where we're going to be using them. So you're going to start off by giving it a value, a value field, and this value field will be super rare. Perfect. The next one, what we're going to do is say from, and you have to specify an ID here to an ID. So here we're going to say this from is going to start off by 1, and then the to field will also be 1. Meaning that our weight for our super rares, there will only be one image rendered during our creation period. we can copy and paste this object 2 more times and change the name of the second one to rare. Now keep in mind you can use your own values and also your own rarities, as long as you just change the values wherever it's needed. Next, we can change this to say this needs to start from 2, and maybe it goes all the way up to 4. And then lastly, we have the original. And the original will go from 5 up until the end of the edition. So you can generally specify here the edition size. So rather use this variable to make sure that this will render throughout your rest of your edition. We're going to make the edition size, the total edition size, 10. And this is a variable that you can use throughout the program if you ever need to reference how big the edition is. Maybe you want to say this is edition 2 out of 10. You can add that in this code just by having this variable and having access to it. Next, why did we specify these 3 objects? We need to use them some way. And we need to start changing how we actually importing our layers as a whole. So let's do that. When looking at our layers, there's a few changes we need to make. Remember in the previous tutorial, our ball section and the bottom lid and also the eye color, they all only had images inside them. But now let's take an example. This eye color has the original, it has rare and super rare. Now we need to translate that and also keep in mind to keep track of that in our layers section. How can we do that? Well, first of all, we can get rid of this location because we're not going to need it from this point onwards. In the elements key, we can basically cut this function out and put an object in there. Next, you want to specify the different rarities that you have. So we're going to start off by original, and we're going to put that function back there, put a comma and put rare, put that function, comma, and super rare. Perfect. Now the next thing that we have to consider is how do we get access to these things? Now obviously it makes sense that the path that we have in here would be appended like this. So go ahead and append the paths of these folder structures to the rarity on the left hand side over here. That's why I said keep these paths with the underscore. You don't really need to do that, but I just do that because it looks better, and that's just why I mentioned that. But now that we have this, and if you are using your own rarities, make sure that these object keys are the same values that you have here in your rarity weights. Perfect. Let's go back to what we were doing here. We are almost done. There's just a few things that we need to double check, and that is how these elements get created or actually consumed and pulled back. So when we go to the get elements function that we've created over here, there's something that I said we are going to change, and we are indeed. We are going to change this file name to path, and we are basically going to give it the path over there. And then all we need to do is wrap this inside a string and use string interpolation to kind of concatenate these two, right? We can either put the / in there like so and remove them from our elements over here, or we can just put the path with the I over there because it will already have the / in the path. Let's leave it, let's actually put it in here. It's best practice to actually concatenate something on the fly. So I'm going to take these out and just leave them like that. And this should give us the path and the name. And that's basically the only thing we really need. Previously, we used the file name system and it worked, but also not too well. We can get rid of the index and just leave I over there. And then the last thing that we need to do is in this name, clean name function, we had a loop which looped over the previous rarities that we have, but we don't need that anymore. So just go ahead and remove that too. I think we are done with the config.js and we're ready to start consuming these variables that we've created in our actual index.js. So now that we're ready, go to your index.js and let's start consuming and replacing the variables, first of all, that we incorporated in here and imported in here. At this point in time in the code will probably break when we try and run it. But let's give it a go and see what happens. We try and run and we can immediately see that it says edition size already been declared and all these different things. And that is true because we have a edition size that we've been using before. So let's go and resolve now what we've incorporated and how can we make this program start running again. Now I'm going to go through and run it every time and we'll see what's missing so that you go through the debug process with me like always so you know what you're doing. Firstly, it says that the edition size has already been declared, and that is true. If you have a look at the edition size, you can see it here on line 17 as well. It might be different on which line it sits, but basically this line can go away. We can omit this because we are already importing it from the config.js file. So let's remove that. And then another piece of code that we can remove that actually went with that file is here at the top, the my arguments. We don't need that anymore because we're not reading anything from the terminal. Next, we can go and see where that's still being used. And this time it's being used in the while loop and it's in its import. And that is perfectly fine. We've just taken out the two places where it was also being used in the previous code. If we run it now, it will break, but we'll get another error that we can actually debug and use and go and rectify. So if we run it now, we can see that our error says, let's go and see, file name cannot read property of file name. And that is perfectly correct. If you recall, in our config.js, we did take away the file name and called it path. But we're going to fix that in just a second. I think the main concept would be for us to try and fit all the pieces together first and then run it and then see what's left that we can debug. So firstly, what I want you to do is go down to the main loop section, and at some point we might need to start splitting this function up. A good rule of thumb is when a function gets bigger than 10 lines, you're gonna have to kind of split it up. We're not gonna do that in this section. I just wanna get the rarities down, and then on a later update, we'll get to clean up the code a bit more. Perfect. So the next thing that we wanna do is we actually wanna see what's happening. So on this line, we get into the create function, and on this line, we get an addition count. Now, currently we have this set as 1. But remember, we have created a variable for that, and that we can use the start edition from variable. Next, we can change this edition size, which is being used at the top, to end edition at. The reason for this is you sometimes want an edition that's maybe edition out of 1,000, but for now you only want to mint or create artworks from 0 or from 1 to 100, and you don't want to mint or create the whole series now. That's why when you scroll up and I said the edition size you can use in the code, we're not going to use this variable now, but you can. And you can do things like putting it into the text where we might actually display how we can use that variable. But for now, we're just going to leave it there. Maybe we'll hook it up right at the end. So let's go down and see what's left to do. After we have the edition count, we're ready to go into our loop. And then while we're in the loop, we have our console.log just to log the edition count. Now, edition count's going to stay like that because it's already been declared and defined, so everything is perfect. But at this point, in this line, this is actually where we want the rarity, and we want to see what rarity we should be creating. So if you go rarity, let rarity, we're going to equal that to something that we get from a function. So much like the create DNA, let's call this get rarity function. The thing that we can pass into the get rarity function is actually the edition count, and that's all we need. So basically edition count, pass that into this function, and then we're going to create a function that actually will extract the rarity for us based on our weights that we've specified over here. We're most probably going to have to import the weights as well. So remember in your config.js to export the weights and also import them here at the top. Perfect. So let's go down to our looping function. We need to create our get rarity function, and then we can start. So let's copy the get rarity over there, and let's make some space for it just above the isDNA unique. So we can say const get rarity is equal to anonymous function, and what it's being passed in is the edition count. Perfect. Next, go and open that function, and let's go and declare a variable and also call it rarity. And this time we're going to equal it to an empty string. It really doesn't matter what you define that as, because it's going to change definitely. If it doesn't change, it will mean that the program breaks, and it will definitely let you know. So that's actually a good thing, because we want everything to run smoothly. Next, you can return the value of rarity, like so, and let's open up these brackets. Basically, we're going to do the same kind of thing that we've done here for our create DNA, but this time we're going to loop through our weights. So we've imported the rarity weight at the top. So this time you can just say rarity weights dot for each. And in here we can say rarity, but now we have to think about it, because maybe we'll call it rarity weight, and this won't make sense. So at this point, maybe we should make this plural, so we can call it rarity weights instead of rarity weight, because it's an array. So just go and change it in the import over there, save it, and also in your config, in the exports, and also here. So you have to do those updates. It's just better for us to make the code more readable. So let's get back to the get rarity now, and we have the rarity weights. We're also exporting now, getting the variable rarity weight, which means we're getting the value. Perfect. Next, what you can do is, this is where we have to put an if statement. What is this if statement going to do, and what is it going to check? Well, think about it like this. We need to find a value, so our value is going to be our addition count. And when we look at the weights, we're going to have to find a way to specify if that addition count is between these two numbers, and also if it's between these two numbers or if it's between these two numbers. And that's how we're going to have to check. And if it is, we're going to have to use this value to get this the specific elements of the elements array. And that's basically how we're going to do the rarity. So if we go back here, there's a simple thing we can do to check. We can say, well, we want the addition count, and the addition count should be greater or equal to the rarity weight dot from. Okay, so it should be greater or equal to the from field, and the addition count should also be less or equal to the rarity weight dot to. And that's it. That's basically the function that will pick up if which rarity an element is. So what we can do is we can now just say the rarity dot not dot push, but is equal to the rarity weight dot value. And that's basically how we do it. Now the value field, like I explained, if you look in the config.js where we specify the weights, it's just this value. So that variable will hold this for us. What we get back from get rarity is one of those three values, right? It's either going to be original, it's either going to be rare or super rare. and that's exactly what we want. We can go and verify this by console.logging it out. So, sorry about, don't import console, console.log, and we can log the rarity over there. So if we run the program, it's most probably still going to break, but I want you to see that we at least get a rarity. And there we go. If you look at these two lines in the terminal, you can see that we have the edition count of 1, and it's super rare. And that's exactly what we want, right? So there we go. It's working. It's picked its first rarity, and obviously it's going to break down the line because we haven't catered for how it's being handled further down. Next, while we have this rarity, I'm going to just open up a bit more space over here. Let's leave that console.log with the DNA list. Once we have our rarity, we can use it now in a few different places. And the first place that we actually want to use it is in the create DNA function. Why is that? Well, the reason for this is because we only want the DNA function to get DNA back where there are images to cater for that DNA. So if we go up to the create DNA up here, we also need to now import the rarity as an argument. And then inside here, because this is going to be an actual key word, right? It's actually just a string. We want to append it, and the only place where we want to append it is in this line over here. After the elements, you put these brackets and you place the rarity. What do these brackets do? Well, basically, what we are saying is elements.superrare.length. But we can't use it like this. You can't use dot notation when you're using strings. So how you can use strings for that is using the bracket notation that works the same, and this is also then very dynamic. This way, it will create only it will only take the rarity's length and then consider that when creating our DNA. So now that we're getting the proper DNA from our create DNA function, we can carry on, right? And we know that this DNA is perfect according to the rarity that's assigned to it because we're actually passing it in and making use of it. The other place where we need to pass it in is actually here in the construct layer to DNA. We don't need to do it for the DNA is unique. All that functionality will still work the same. So just go and put the rarity inside of this function, pass it in there so we can make use of it. Perfect. Let's go to the construct layer to DNA function. In here, in the arguments at the top, include your rarity, but this time with an underscore just to declare it's an argument variable. And we have to basically put this right here after the elements, much like we did with the created DNA, and we're going to put our rarity. And that should be enough to make everything work. There is a few things that I just quickly want to run through to make sure that we've updated it. And one of those things are when we go back to the config.js and we go and scroll down to this place where we have path. We used to have a file name in here. So I just want to quickly do a search in the index.js for file name. And here you can see there's file name. So we won't have the file name anymore. We'll just have path. And we also don't need to append this location because this location already comes fine with the path that we specified and that we're giving it. That's the first thing that I just wanted to double check on. And then we actually have to have a look at using the rest of these variables. So for the description, basically here where we are adding the metadata, we're going to have to think what we want in our metadata. Now, we do want to add our description, so we can add the description like so. And then if we go up here, we have our image edition size, which we'll just have a look at now, how to use that. And then we have the base image URL. Now, how you want to construct a base image URL is something like this. I'm just going to go for a second back to the config.js file where we actually declare the base image URI, what we want to do is essentially have a / with a 1. And that 1 would represent the NFT in the smart contract ID. It can be 20, it can be 1,000, but that's basically what we want to get to. That's why we have the base specified here, and the rest we're going to put in the metadata. What we then need to do is go back to the index.js, go down to where our metadata lives, and go and put in an image. So for the image, that's going to be simple. We are going to first place in our base URI, then a /, and then we're going to append the edition. Simple as that. So that's all we need for the image. And let's just think. So metadata of an NFT needs a name, a description, and an image. So we don't have the name yet, and that's something we can add at the top here. For name, we can keep it simple, and we can just do an hash. Well, let's do it like this. We can specify a hash in the front, and then we can just also simply put the image edition, right? This edition. And that's basically the metadata that you actually need, and you don't need anything more. We already have a separate edition variable if you want to double check it in some way. We have a date variable, and we have all the attributes needed. So this is what we have so far. I'm going to try and run this here at the bottom, and let's see what we get. Okay, so we do end up getting an error saying I cannot find property of length, and that makes sense because we've missed something in the code. If we go back to the config.js, you can see that we pass in the path, but we actually putting it to a string, which should be placed like that, so it actually can pick up the variable. And that's not all. I've shown you guys how to do one of these elements, but we forgot to do the whole rest. Now I'm going to duplicate this a few times, and then we're going to replace them. So maybe it would be a good idea for us to do them one by one so we don't lose track. So let's take the eye color, let's replace eye color in these objects, and let's remove eye color. Next, we'll copy and paste that, and then we'll take the iris. Now, this is important, and after this section, our program should run and we should have our rarities. This is a bit more setup than usual than our previous program, but remember, in this case, we actually now have the added benefit of specifying rarity weights, which is very, very cool. So after I've done this section, everything should be perfectly fine. So let's just verify that. I'm trying to do this as fast as possible, and as you guys know, I always try and do these videos live with the errors in them, because that's how real life coding is. It's not a fantasy world where nothing breaks. Things do break, and we need to fix them. And that's how I like to do my tutorials. Perfect. We've replaced all the different layers with their different super rare and original elements. And now we can finally give this program a go. Let's run it again. Let's clear the terminal, pressing Command K if you didn't know how to clear the terminal. And there we go. Our NFTs, our artworks are being created. Now, off the bat, let's just quickly have a look at what's actually happening over here. In the logs, we can see that our NFT ID1 wanted to be created, and it's a super rare. And indeed it is, because in our rarity weights here in the config.js, we said that from 1 to 1 it should be super rare. So it would make 1 super rare. Next, we expected to have 3 rares, because 2, 3, and 4 would be rares. Let's go and verify that and see what it did. So there is an array, there's a rare, and there's a rare. And that's exactly what it did. Sometimes you might find that it says rare, 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 and it goes on for like 6 times, but then you'll find that there's a DNA match and it has to rerun that line of code. And that usually happens, there would be DNA matches in here, but let's carry on. There's an original, another original, and the rest would be all originals. There you can see that there's a DNA match, DNA exists, it skipped the loop and tried it again, and it tried it again over there, until it could finish with all the possibilities that it can find. Now you might notice something weird with this DNA going on here, and that's because we have very little images actually inside of our folders. So for instance, if you open the iris folder, there's an original, rare, and super rare folder, but the files inside, there's only one. And that's why all these IDs look so binary, because there are very few images. If we were to up one of the files, so for instance, you can see that the second column over here, if you look at the second column, that would be the ball, I believe. But anyway, the ball has more originals, more rares, and more super rares to choose from. And that's why the code, or the DNAs for that matter, looks like that. That's also why the super rares IDs were all 0, because there's only one image of each super rare in here that it can choose from, apart from the eye color, I believe. And it chose the first one. And that's why. So my suggestion is to fill these folders up, give enough originals, give enough rare elements, and give enough super rare elements so that you can play around with your widths. We are going to try and play around with the widths anyway, and just to verify that it did create our NFTs, and yes, there it did. Remember I said, remember this red eyeball, and indeed this is our super rare, this is a rare NFT, and that's a rare NFT, and then the rest would be all original. And there you get your rarity weights. We can play around, and we can actually say, well, we want from 1 to 2 to be a super rare, and then from 2 to maybe 5 to be rare. Now, this is the only possibility for the super rares, because like I said, there's only one file, and if we create more than 2, it will just say that the DNA already exists. So we can just run this program. It will create 2 super rares for us right here at the top. Let's wait for the program to finish. Let's scroll down. Actually, let's clear this and run this again so we can have a clean terminal and see what's happening. Perfect. Did we save this? We need to save this. So we need super rares from 1 to 2. Oh, and we need to say this needs to be from 3 to 5. Otherwise, it's going to overwrite that one. So let's run it again and let's see. So now we get 2 super rares in our addition. We have the DNA match, right? A DNA exists. So it ran it again because, like I mentioned, there's only a few super rare elements. But indeed, it only created 2. And we can verify that by clicking on these 2 images, and both have the red eyeball. So that's pretty cool. And then the rest is rare and original. I think you guys get the image and also the picture that I'm trying to paint here. But I also think this will truly help you guys now start manipulating the code that you've written into this fantastical piece of work that actually can have weights to it. And you can mint big collections using this method. So thank you again, guys, for sticking with me through this edition and through this tutorial. I really appreciate each and every one of you, like I explained. Please leave a comment in this section. I really do read through each comment. And then till next time, I'll see you again. Please remember that all this code will be sitting on the V2 branch, not on main. This I just switched out for now, but it's all going to be sitting on the V2. So go and check it out, go and grab it, and then play around with it. Cheers for now.